You ever watch someone get so high on their own righteousness that they plow a semi-straight through your family's history and celebrate like they just stormed the beaches or took gold in the pettiest neighbor Olympics? That was my Saturday. Karen, the kind of woman who thinks a clipboard outranks the Constitution, barreled a full-size semi into my grandfather's 1943 mailbox. 80 years of stories gone in one blast of ego and diesel smoke. She's perched up in the cab, fist pumping, horn blaring, shouting like she's a star of some underdog movie, except she's the only one who doesn't realize she's a villain. You think I'm exaggerating? I wish. What she didn't understand, in all her roaring triumph, is that she had just demolished a World War II Veterans Memorial, and her little parade, engine coughing, fluids dripping onto gravel, was recorded from 4 different angles. For the record, I'm not even part of her HOA. There she is, celebrating a truck she can barely maneuver, convinced she's won some glorious war. With zero awareness, she's about to lose everything. Let me rewind a bit. 6 months ago, inheriting my granddad's farmhouse felt like a blessing. After a brutal divorce that chewed up 2 years of my life in Portland, all I wanted was quiet. A reset. I'm Dominic. Dom if you're friendly. 52. Professional land surveyor. Completely unprepared for the chaos waiting in this peaceful neighborhood. The house still carries the scent of cedar and linseed oil from when my grandfather built it by hand. Each morning I'd sip coffee on the wraparound porch where he used to sit, never talking about Normandy except to say he never wanted to see sand again. And at the end of the gravel drive stood his pride. A blue, hand-painted mailbox. White numbers refreshed every year until his hands shook too much to steady the brush. He used to say, "A man's home begins at the street." That mailbox was the first chapter of our story. Peace lasted until Karen arrived. I'd love to describe her as some dramatic villain, but honestly she looked like she ran an overpriced yoga studio. White Escalade, hair bleached to oblivion, clipboard clutched like a weapon of myth. First morning, she doesn't knock, just clacks up my porch steps in 4-inch heels like she owns the soil. President Delgado. Willowbrook Estates, HOA. No smile. We need to address your numerous violations. The list, apparently, was endless. My chicken coop? A disease vector. My tomatoes? Rodent attractors. Granddad's mailbox? Visually incompatible. I kept my voice steady. Ma'am, this property predates your HOA by 60 years. I'm not bound by your covenants. She stared at me like I confessed to arson. Every property complies. No exceptions. For good measure, she called code enforcement, claimed I was running an illegal farm and disturbing the peace. 2 weeks later, she had 60 neighbors crammed into the community center, flipping through 40 slides of my yard zoomed in like it was a National Geographic expose on rogue zucchini. She framed me as a threat to property values and, somehow, to children everywhere because of my scandalous squash. By the end, the air smelled like burnt coffee and fear. They voted that any property bordering the HOA must comply, or else. That's when it escalated. At 2 a.m, she crept onto my land and spray-painted "Violator" across my grandfather's mailbox. Red paint dripping like blood. Ever seen your family history turn into a crime scene? I have. I filed a police report. But what stayed with me were the neighbors who quietly approached afterward. She did this to the Hendersons. One whispered, started with complaints, ended with vandalism. They moved. The whole street was hostage to one woman and her clipboard. But Karen picked the wrong fight. 30 years as a land surveyor taught me something simple. Hope isn't strategy. Documentation is. By sunrise, I had photographs, security footage, paint samples. Everything cataloged. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Measure twice, cut once. So I built a case, not just for the police, but for every neighbor too afraid to speak. Karen doubled down. Another meeting. Now I was guilty of surveillance for installing cameras on my own property, harassing elected officials. She demanded paperwork for my chicken coop. The problem? The rules she cited didn't exist. My structures were protected under state heritage statutes. She was inventing ordinances as she went. I waited until she finished her speech, then stood calmly. Mrs. Delgado, You're referencing laws that don't exist and demanding authority you don't have." Her face flushed crimson. She tried to cut me off. Some neighbors looked curious now, others still terrified, but the cracks were there. Her next move was a formal letter. Cease all agricultural activity immediately or face legal consequences. That was her fatal error. I spent hours in county archives and uncovered a treasure. My land carried a 1943 agricultural exemption. My garden wasn't just legal. It was shielded from exactly this kind of interference. Instead of responding directly to her, I sent copies of the exemption to the HOA board, the county, and the state HOA oversight division. I filed harassment charges. By Friday, the state launched an official inquiry into Karen. By noon, she was on her porch yelling about government tyranny. Have you ever watched someone realize they punched themselves in the face? She only grew louder. In front of half the neighborhood, she shouted, "I'll find a way to get rid of you permanently." Mrs. Elise froze mid-watering. Rodriguez stopped washing his car. Old Mr. Patterson pretended not to listen, but everyone heard. Next, she accused me of illegally subdividing land for commercial rental and operating unlicensed agriculture. City Inspector Rodriguez arrived, walked the property, examined my tomatoes, and shook his head. "Sir," he said, "whoever wrote this complaint thinks we're fools." He handed it to me. Karen's signature sprawled across the bottom. The desperation was almost charming. But while she was busy inventing violations, I was combing through her paper trail. That oversized deck she loved to host wine nights on, built past the setback line. No permit. Classic. Ask forgiveness later construction. So I filed a complaint. Photos, measurements, code citations, the works. That got the city's attention fast. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the enforcer. She was a violator. Her beloved deck? Achilles' heel. Saturday, 3 a.m., my cameras caught her creeping around again, fluorescent orange spray paint in hand. She even tossed the empty can into her own recycling bin. By Monday, she had a citation for vandalism and was screaming about corrupt police and conspiracies. That same afternoon, the city inspector arrived to evaluate her deck. Clipboard out, tape measure ready. Karen cycled through every shade of purple, trying to explain why the structure was just slightly larger than permitted. You'd think that would have humbled her. It didn't. Wednesday, Mrs. Elise called in a whisper. "You need to look outside." Karen stood in her driveway beside a semi-truck, pointing toward my land while talking intensely to the driver. Diesel fumes drifted across the fence line. My stomach tightened. She wasn't planning a letter this time. She was planning something physical. The next day, a surveyor named Sullivan showed up. Brand new equipment. Nervous eyes. "You're encroaching 6 inches onto HOA property," he read stiffly from a notepad. It would have been funny if it weren't so sloppy. Karen hired a surveyor to challenge a surveyor. Problem was, he referenced a 1987 marker, not the original 1943 monument my grandfather set in concrete. I checked, carefully. Turns out the HOA was the one trespassing. 3 feet onto my land. Sometimes karma wears a reflective vest. I called Frank Patterson, 86 years old, part of the firm that placed the original markers. He shuffled out, examined the monuments, and confirmed it all. The truth, once poured in concrete, tends to outlast ego. I filed a professional fraud complaint against Sullivan. Now, Karen had another fire to put out, so she called an emergency HOA meeting, waving Sullivan's bogus survey like a war flag. Claimed I'd stolen HOA land for decades. Then Bob Martinez, retired engineer, calmly raised his hand. Which markers did they rely on? Karen stumbled. Bob didn't. The 1943 monuments are the legal standard. Murmurs rippled through the room. Doubt finally pierced her armor. But she wasn't done. Now she started muttering about final solutions and heavy equipment. I don't scare easy, but when someone obsessed with control starts talking machinery, you pay attention. Saturday, she rolled up in her Escalade with an attorney and a stack of official notices, including a $12,000 fine for imaginary violations. I smiled, took her papers, then brought out my own folder, the 1943 deed, exemption records, jurisdictional maps. Her attorney went pale. "Ma'am, This property isn't part of the HOA. It never was. 6 months of warfare against someone she had zero authority over. Karen nearly collapsed. But everyone has to follow the rules. Not everyone, I replied calmly. Especially not me. But the look in her eyes unsettled me. I'd seen that type before. Someone who'd rather burn the field than lose a harvest. The next day I gathered the neighbors. She's unraveling, I told them, showing footage of her vandalizing my mailbox. If she makes a move, I need witnesses. Fear turned into anger. She made my daughter cry, Sarah Rodriguez said. She reported my mom's wheelchair ramp. Jim added, enough was enough. Meanwhile, I rebuilt the mailbox. Steel I-beam core, 4 feet deep in reinforced concrete. Hurricane rated. I wanted her to understand something simple. You can't intimidate someone who's anchored. Saturday morning escalated again. Karen slipped into my yard and tried to poison my chickens with antifreeze. My cameras caught everything. Detective Wong arrested her before 9 a.m. animal cruelty, felony. She bailed out using her elderly mother's refinanced home, which meant she had nothing left to lose. Next, she targeted my career, filing false complaints with the state board, tried to revoke my surveying license. Fortunately, 30 years of spotless work and loyal clients outweighed her fiction, but the spiral continued. Thursday night, she was spotted in a neighbor's yard with 2 men measuring distances and snapping photos. Not vandalism anymore. Conspiracy. Friday diesel engines echoed through the street. Neighborhood Watch reported Karen had rented a semi and hired a jittery driver. Police couldn't intervene, not until she acted. That evening, officers knocked on my door. Karen had fabricated voicemail threats, trying to have me arrested. It took hours to untangle. She was trying to exhaust me, mentally, legally, soften me up. Saturday morning, the rumble returned. I looked outside. There she was, in the cab of a semi-truck, directing the driver with exaggerated hand motions, lining up, not for my house, for the mailbox. Have you ever watched someone attempt to erase your family's legacy and truly believe it will break you? That was her mistake. She didn't know about the steel I-beam, 4 feet deep, engineered by a man who measures twice. The impact sounded like an explosion. The mailbox bent. The truck folded. Radiator burst. Bumper twisted. Steam poured upward like a distress signal. Her celebration lasted 2 seconds. Then she was stranded. Engine dead. Neighbors filming, sirens approaching. Karen shrieked about booby-trapped mailboxes and assassination attempts. Detective Wong stepped forward calmly. Ma'am, this appears to be a properly installed mailbox that withstood vehicular impact. Why did you drive a semi into it? In full meltdown mode, she screamed. He's not even in the HOA. As if that explained attempted demolition. That was my cue. I handed Detective Wong my binder. 6 months of harassment, vandalism, fraud, financial irregularities. Turns out Karen hadn't just bullied neighbors. She'd embezzled $144,000 from HOA funds over 2 years. Silence fell heavy as realization spread. Charges stacked quickly. Embezzlement, animal cruelty, grand theft, property destruction, fraud. Assets frozen. House foreclosed. HOA voted her out unanimously. Without her, the neighborhood exhaled. Weekend potlucks returned. Bob opened a community tool library. Kids rode bikes without fear. And the steel mailbox? It became legend. Insurance payouts from the truck funded a local scholarship program. Napoleon the Rooster, survivor of antifreeze and chaos, became a minor celebrity on coffee shop bulletin boards. Karen pleaded guilty, served 18 months, sold the house, vanished. Now, when new neighbors ask about the reinforced mailbox at the end of the drive, I tell them it's a reminder. You don't let bullies win just because they're loud, or because they rent bigger trucks. So I'll ask you, what would you have done? How far would you go to defend what matters? And is there a moment when standing your ground becomes more important than keeping the peace? I have a feeling I'm not the only one with a story like that.